the aiding of pro-Russia rebels in the east of the Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, and an unrelenting air campaign that has bolstered the fledgling government forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And this air campaign has also led to a high number of civilian casualties. This has resulted in strong protests and contempt from numerous countries around the world, including the United States. On the other hand, actions taken by the West, including NATO training exercises in Eastern Europe, U.S. military support for moderate Syrian rebel groups, which the Russians and Syrians declared as terrorists, and accusations of Russian hacking into U.S. government computer systems have greatly concerned and angered Russia. So during one of the most bitterly fought presidential campaigns in recent memory between veteran politician Hillary Clinton and business mogul Donald John Trump, the relationship between the United States and Russia, particularly that between the U.S. and Russian President Vladimir Putin, became a focal point of debate both in the media and between the two candidates during their campaigns. Whereas Clinton portrayed the Russian leader as an aggressive and unpredictable individual who was a clear threat to U.S. security both at home and abroad, Trump insisted he was a strong leader whom he admired and could be a reliable partner in global affairs. Clinton's surprise defeat to Donald Trump in November not only shocked the world, but also left many questions unanswered and the future of the world uncertain. As the new president-elect began to form his cabinet and team of advisors, and these people will shape his administration, the world lies in wait to see what will happen next. I believe the possible implications of the Trump presidency on the future of the relationship between the United States and Russia in particular will actually become undeniably stronger under a Trump administration, because the two nations will work closely together in terms of world affairs, and because of this strange cult of personality shared by both Putin and Trump, coupled with the Trump domestically centered America First policy, which I'll go into. So the question is, what happened before and during the campaign? So from the start of his campaign, Donald Trump was a political outsider who clearly did not harbor the same negative sentiments that both Democrats and his fellow Republicans had for the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. In fact, he even traded various compliments with the autocrat, stating, quote, "It's always a great honor to be so nicely complimented by a man so respected in his own country and beyond." In his own unique way, he avoided any opportunity to criticize the Russian leader, as the other candidates had done, and continually pressed on a campaign that was centered around his own personality and this America First national policy. So the America First policy would be a concentration of a significant portion of U.S. resources to the building and infrastructure of domestic projects and of domestic affairs, as well as a gradual distancing from the NATO alliance if, as Trump has stated, European countries do not contribute more financial and military resources to the alliance. In his speech on his proposed foreign policy plan, Trump explained, quote, "Many Americans must wonder why our politicians seem more interested in defending the borders of foreign countries than their own. Americans must know that we are putting the American people first again, on trade, on immigration, on foreign policy. The jobs, incomes, and security of the American worker will always be my first priority. This is very important. The policy would see an end to this thing called unilateralism that had been the center of American foreign policy since the beginning of the Second Iraq War in 2003, and very much angered the Russian and as well as the Chinese, as they felt America had been meddling in foreign conflicts and attempting to flex military, economic, and political muscle around the world. In 2014, speech to the Russian diplomatic corps, Putin said, "We observe with regret that international law is not working, the most basic norms of decency are not complied with, and the principle of all permissiveness is gaining the upper hand." And Putin is actually referring to Washington placing its unilateral action above U.S. law, the U.S. Constitution, and international law. So it's safe to say they didn't agree at all on their foreign policies. Now, although this issue would have likely continued under a Clinton administration, who did harbor the same sentiments as Barack Obama, her shocking defeat may have ended this policy of unilateralism for years to come. Now, on the Russian side, Putin has not in the least been quiet about his respect and admiration for the new president-elect. During an annual meeting with journalists, Putin stated, quote, "He's a very flamboyant man, very talented, no doubt about that. He's the absolute leader of the presidential race, as we see it today. He says that he wants to move to another level of relations, to a deeper level of relations with Russia. How can we not welcome that? Of course we can welcome it." Assistant Professor James Brown at Temple University Japan campus also explained that Trump's strong and boorish personality, similarly to that of the former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, have likely played into Putin's respect for Trump, in that he's good at dealing with individuals that he feels he can do business with. And since Trump is a businessman, this is naturally going to work, he feels. Although the Western media has claimed Putin and Trump have engaged in a type of bromance that has alarmed a significant number of world leaders and politicians, and some media outlets, including RT and experts in U.S.-Russia relations, that the media was overplaying this relationship between the two, since they have had little personal contact and only shared a brief phone call and a written, quote, telegram in terms of correspondence since the election. So what are the negative aspects? Although the deterioration of diplomatic relationships between the United States and the NATO alliance has gradually occurred, which has been including Trump's rhetoric and feared by European leaders, it's also highly debatable. But there are also still a few numbers of dangers that can emerge from a renewed alliance between the U.S. and Russia. Trump's lack of political and international experience could affect the future of Baltic states against Russian aggression, the unrest in Ukraine, and the ongoing Syrian conflict, to name a few. The Baltic states, for example, which comprise of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, had been unwillingly dominated by the Soviet Union until 1991, and could again be subject to Russian pressure if the U.S. was reluctant to support NATO. According to Professor Brown, Russia could be interested in destabilizing the Baltic states by using the Russian-speaking population as a means to gain influence in the region. Additionally, the future of Ukraine has been uncertain due to years of unrest and civil war in that country's east and the intervention of Russian volunteers and heavy equipment being supplied to pro-Russia rebels. In a country that has been plagued by political corruption and run by a government teetering on the brink of collapse, and ignorance of the situation by a sitting U.S. president, coupled with little care in the fate of that country, would likely see the Ukraine dominated by Russian interests. Finally, any support by the U.S. of Russian actions in Syria, by the U.S. of Russian actions in Syria, would further legitimize the Syrian government and lead to an even further unrest in the region. Therefore, serious consideration must be given to any actions taken by the new president that could have a negative effect on the current geopolitical climate. Now, what are the positive aspects of this relationship, or what could be the positive aspects? Well, the possible positive outcome of a warm relationship between the United States and Russia can likely be determined by exploring the rhetoric of the president-elect and Vladimir Putin himself. In a speech to his constituents before the election, Trump explained, quote, "I've always felt that Russia and the United States should be able to work well with each other towards defeating terrorism and restoring world peace, not to mention trade and all of the other benefits derived from mutual respect." Although the U.S. has been engaged in the war on terror since the attacks on 9/11, Trump foresees a different approach to tackling terrorism, in that closer cooperation with Russia and a proposed dissolving of the NATO alliance proved to be more beneficial in the future. Trump stated, quote, "We have spent trillions of dollars over time on plane, missiles, ships, equipment, building up our military to provide a strong defense for Europe and Asia. The countries we are defending must pay for the cost of this defense, and if not, the U.S. must be prepared to let these countries defend themselves. But this could be extremely dangerous." He also praised Putin in his efforts against ISIS in the Syrian conflict. The war has been raging since March 15, 2011, in the uprising during this Arab Spring, and so far has resulted in millions of displaced civilians and the death of over 250,000 people. Trump stated, "I like that Putin is bombing the hell out of ISIS. I'll tell you why. Russia has to get rid of ISIS, because Putin does not want ISIS coming into Russia." But again, these are factually incorrect, and there is no basis for his argument. His praise of Russian efforts in Syria have been met with backlash in U.S. political circles, as well as within its own Republican Party, since the Russians have not only targeted ISIS, but also the rebels fighting against the forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. However, Trump's disdain for his own party and other U.S. politicians has shown that he has little care for the opinions of the majority, and believes that his instinct and America First policy will prevail in any situation. And his criticisms of world leaders and their apparent taking advantage of the United States, both financially and militarily, as well as support for the Russian military efforts and their leader, will either see a rise in their contributions or international alliances, or a deterioration of NATO and less dependence on the United States for global security. Yet it is important not to jump the gun with Donald Trump's rhetoric. During the bitterly fought U.S. campaign, he did say a lot of things that he went back on. Since he has begun the transition to the presidency, he has voiced support for NATO, reassured allies such as Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of America's continued commitment to his partners around the world. However, making certain U.S. deals and centering on progress with Putin and portraying the U.S. as a country that is willing to negotiate in certain situations, either significantly improved relationship between the two will emerge, or regional tensions between NATO and the Russian too early to tell, and it's important to monitor events closely. So what has been determined from what I've said? So I've explored the precarious situation that existed between the United States and Russia before the 2016 presidential election. With the Clinton administration in power, that relationship will likely have continued on a downward spiral and paved the way for an uncertain future between the two nations. However, by paying compliments and insisting on an America First policy in global affairs, Donald Trump had won the respect of the Russian president and received compliments in return. But what does that mean? Although a mutual respect between the two leaders, as well as a possible partnership in world affairs, could be possible, it should also be